Chapter 47. As soon as he had left the bathscape, he made for the chamber that he knew would house the marker. Centrally located and the biggest of the below-water chambers, it had 4 ways in. But 3 of those ways, he discovered, had been welded closed, permanently sealed. The 4th, the main entrance, already had 2 guards stationed in front of it. He tried to bluff his way in there. "I'm supposed to be in there," he said, "to bring the marker up." "Do you have a pass?" asked one of the guards. "Nobody gets in without a pass," said the other. "I left my pass back in my room," he said. "I don't want to be late. I'll bring it back and show it to you later." "No pass, no entrance," said the guard. Another man, a scientist, sidled past him, flashing his pass, and was nodded through. Altman watched as the doors slid open, but saw only an airlock on the other side. The man stood there waiting, and the door slid shut. "Please," said Altman, "I need to." "We already told you," said the first guard. "No pass, no entrance. Now move along or I'll have you thrown in the brig." He went back down the corridor. He couldn't get in, but maybe he could at least get some idea of what was happening. He went from lab to lab, trying doors until he found one that also had a big window facing toward the chamber. Looking out, he saw the marker hovering just below the chamber, being slowly drawn up and in, but he couldn't see into the chamber itself. Something had been done to render the glass semi-opaque. He could see vague shapes and a sense of movement, and then, as they began to reel it in, the shadowy rising shape of the marker, but a little more. "You see," said Field, "we knew you would come around to the truth." Altman hadn't come around. He still thought that Field and his believers were insane, but saw no point in telling Field that. The marker had been in the station less than 24 hours, but ever since the marker had been raised and secured, the whole feel of the station had changed. Even before he'd entered the submarine bay, a series of researchers had been declared inessential and had been shipped back to the Dredger Corp land compound, which rumor had it was serving now less as a research facility and more as a holding tank for scientists for whom Markov had no use, but whom he didn't want to release into the larger world. Ada had been among them, which meant he hadn't gotten a chance to see her and make sure she was okay. Altman suspected he, too, might have been among them in the bathscape, if it hadn't arrived slightly earlier. As it was, he'd been told to pack his things, that he'd be among the batch of researchers to be shipped out early the next morning. "I need a favor," he claimed, his hand on the chunk of marker that he carried in his pocket. "There's something the marker wants from me. I have to see it." Field's face fell. "It's being guarded," he said. "It's very hard to see it." "You said the other evening that some of the believers were in Markov's inner circle." "Yes," said Field. "It's true, but it's important," said Altman. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't." He took the chunk out of his pocket and showed it to Field. "This is a piece of it," he said. "It needs to be returned." Field reached out and very gently touched it. "Can I hold it?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. Altman handed it to him. He took it delicately in both hands, like he was holding a newborn child. His face lit up with joy, and it frightened Altman to see it. He crooned to it, a soft chant, something that Altman couldn't make out, then reluctantly handed it back. He knelt before Altman. "Stand up," said Altman, "and not a word to anybody about what I plan to do." But Field refused to stand. "Thank you for choosing me," he said. His head bowed. "I will do all I can to make the marker whole again." Around 3 in the morning, a knock came at his door. It was Field, and another man with him wearing the black garb of one of Markov's inner circle. He was carrying a package under his arm. Altman vaguely recognized him. "This is Henry Harmon," Field said. "Mr. Harmon, Michael Altman." "I know who he is," said Harmon dryly. "You sure this is absolutely necessary?" Altman nodded. Harmon tossed him the package. He tore it open, saw an outfit identical to Harmon's own. "Put that on," he said. Altman stared at it. "How's this going to help?" he asked. "Won't they recognize me in any case?" "Maybe," said Harmon. "But they won't try to stop us. They won't question the pass as long as you have the uniform. If we have trouble, it'll be afterward, which is a risk I'll have to take." He put it on and they set off. Field followed them, but Harmon turned briefly, shook his head, and Field, a look of disappointment on his face, disappeared. He checked his chronometer. There are 4 guards total, 2 at the door outside the chamber and 2 inside, all armed. We're lucky. The 2 guards inside are with us, though that's far from being generally known. The 2 outside, though, aren't. Shift changes in about 15 minutes and all bets are off. If we stay longer than 10, chances are good that one of the guards will get curious and place a call to check on our authorization. Understood? Yes, said Altman. Here's your pass, he said. It's not the best, but the guards outside should only glance at it. The men inside will go with whatever I say. Harmon was right. The guards outside the room seemed hardly surprised that someone was coming to see the marker in the middle of the night. They looked at Harmon, then glanced at both passes and waved them in. The guards inside didn't even bother with that, withdrawing discreetly to the other side of the room as soon as they entered. Here it was. A series of catwalks had been built up along the walls to make it easy to get a close look at any part of it. Massive and towering, it dominated the whole chamber. Seeing it out of the water, he got a fuller sense of its bulk and strangeness. It was like nothing he had ever seen, a kind of impossible object that was nevertheless there. A power seemed to emanate from it. It was dangerous. At the same time, he felt his scientific impulses kick in. It was amazing, and he generally wanted to study it, a piece of extremely advanced technology, something predating humanity. He took out his holopod and began to vid it. What are you doing? Whispered Harmon. Nobody's allowed to vid it. That's what I came for, he said, but that's not allowed. Altman shrugged once, then ignored him. Either Harmon would stop him, or he wouldn't. He filmed the whole structure at first, then ran the lens in close-up, over the sides closest to him. As he did so, he tried to spot the place where the piece of rock he had in his pocket was from, but he couldn't find it. He felt like he'd only just begun when Harmon grabbed his arm. We've got to go, he whispered. Altman nodded. He slipped the holopod back into his pocket and headed for the door, Harmon pulling him along. Harmon nodded once to the guards on the outside, and they resumed their stations. The guards on the outside he saluted. Why do you need a vid of it? Asked Harmon as they walked away. I've half a mind to turn you in. It's important, said Altman. Trust me, you'll see. 5 minutes later, he was back in his room, hastily packing the hunk of rock he kept on his person. He packed up his holopod onto a memory stick, which he hid in the lining of his jacket, just in case, and then he lay down on the bed and waited. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he would see the marker there, towering above him. It was powerful. It was dangerous. It wanted something from them. Why did Ada worship it? To worship it would be just to put yourself in even more fully at its mercy. And it was not the sort of thing Altman felt to grant mercy. Soon, in an hour or two, a knock would come at the door, and he'd be escorted to the launch and sent back to the land compound. He stared up into the darkness, thinking. Once there, he could forget all about this, pretend like the marker was no longer his problem, and let Markov do with it what he would while he went back to his life. Or he could figure out a way to smuggle out the vid that he had taken of the marker, make it available to the general public, and try to make the marker a matter of international scientific inquiry rather than a toy for the military. The first possibility would mean safety, a chance to lead a more or less normal life. Probably he could patch up his relationship with Ada. Maybe with time, miles away from the marker, separated from the hallucinations of her mother, she would begin to come to her senses. She would stop thinking about it, would regain her sanity. Everything would turn out okay. That is, assuming nothing went wrong with the marker. The second might mean danger, even death. Markov and his goons wouldn't hesitate to kill both him and Ada if it became, as Markov liked to say, expendable. He already knew which one he'd take. He'd never been the sort to take a safe routine. Now, all he had to do was figure out how to get the news out. Chapter 48. Markov went from holophile to holophile, looking for some good news. So far, nothing. So far, the marker had remained unresponsive and mute. They had tried everything they could think of. They had begun to experiment on it. A team of cryptologists was attempting to decipher the symbols on the marker, but without any idea of what the symbols referred to, they weren't making any progress. They had subjected it to an electrical current without result. They had tried irradiating it, subjecting it to microwaves, radio waves, electromagnetic waves. Nothing. Always nothing. Or almost nothing. The marker, the researchers had told him, had begun to broadcast again. Very slight now, but definitely present. Some of the scientists working on the marker seemed to notice it. Others did not. According to Stevens, those who noticed had begun to be visited by dead relatives, just as Altman had been in the bathscape, all with some variation of the same message. Leave the marker alone. Do not try to make use of it. The scientists themselves didn't understand it any better than he did, and after conveying the message to Stevens, they had started speculating about it among themselves. It was a warning, some felt. It should be taken at face value. Nobody should touch the marker. Nobody should try to harness its technology. If they did, they'd unleash something they couldn't imagine. But maybe it was simply that they weren't ready. Others felt that once they proved themselves worthy, the secrets of the marker would be revealed to them. There were many more in the latter camp. A mystical belief in the marker had started to grow. Whenever they could, the believers gathered together and worked themselves up, convinced as they were that the marker was the path to eternal life and oneness with the divine. Some argued that this was what it meant by convergence. So far, the movement had been held in check by the guards, but even some of them, Markov realized, had started to become believers. He was in danger of losing control of his project. They needed to find a simple way to harness the power of the marker, and do it quickly. He was sure the technology, once harnessed, would be the pathway to tremendous power, even domination of the world, not to mention the moon, even the solar system. But now a group of believing scientists was trying to put down strict rules about how the marker could be examined. Only respectful interaction with the marker should be tolerated, nothing that might threaten or damage it or cause it to think less of humanity. We need to show the marker that we were worthy of it, so that it would begin to teach us. It was a ridiculous list of demands, and Markov dismissed them out of hand, but he couldn't stop people from talking. There was a palpable shift in how people approached the marker, even if Markov had refused the believers' demands. Indeed, he was surprised at how many people in the facility seemed to feel an almost religious awe for the marker. Something was changing, shifting, in a way that didn't respond to his usual tactics. He had to figure out a new way to approach the situation. He put a vid link through to Krax. From how he quickly answered, it was clear he'd been waiting beside a monitor for the call. "You've had a chance to look over the data?" Krax asked. "Yes," said Markov. "What's your recommendation, Officer Krax?" "An unequivocal refusal to meet any of their demands. Once we begin to do so, we'll never stop. They're crazies. They shouldn't be tolerated." "It won't end there," said Markov. "Maybe not," said Krax, "but we have the firepower and they don't." "All right," said Markov. "See to it." 2 days later, Krax had a call from one of the guards in the marker chamber. "It's the scientists, sir," he said. Krax could hear a steady rumble of noise in the background. "They're protesting. They won't leave the chamber." "Make them leave," said Krax. "It's not as easy as that," said the guard. "There are a lot of them. We've had to call for reinforcements. What should we do?" "Don't do anything until I get there," said Krax, and disconnected. By the time Krax and his team reached the chamber, things had become more serious. The scientists, led by a pudgy man named Field, had encircled the marker. They had locked arms and were attempting to keep the guards at a distance. The guards had their weapons out. Many of them were visibly upset. "What is it?" Krax asked one of them. "What happened?" "You'll have to ask that one," he said, and gestured to Field. "All right," said Krax. He removed his plasma pistol from its holster and walked forward to the line, to where the man was. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked. "We sent you our demands," said Field. "We read them and rejected them," said Krax. "We're here to protect the marker until you agree to them. Starting an insurrection, are you? This will surely end poorly for you." A few of the men in the line wrestled and looked at one another, though fewer than Krax had hoped. Field looked a little nervous, but his voice was still steady when he spoke. "We're trying to do what's right," he said. "That's right," said Krax. "It's for you and your friends to go back to your quarters." "You'll respect our demands, then?" said Field. Krax levelly met his eye. "You shouldn't be interfering with something you don't understand," he said. I'll ask you again to break your line and go." Field gulped and then shook his head. Honestly, thought Cracks, to look at the guy, you wouldn't think he had it in him, but belief makes people unpredictable. "I'll ask you one more," said Cracks. "After that, I'm done asking." Field had started to sweat. His eyes seemed strangely glazed, but still determined. He tightened his lips into a white line and shook his head. Cracks smiled. Raising the pistol slightly, he shot Field in the foot. He went down in a heap, screaming, and the room broke into chaos. A plasma beam fired by one of the believers cut close across his cheek, singeing his hair, and struck a guard just behind him full in the face. He went down, bleeding, blinded. Cracks crouched, shot another scientist in the leg. Shots flew back and forth on both sides, and then Cracks had an idea. He fired directly at the marker, watched the blue fires splat on the surface and flicker about before glowing out. He darted forward to Field and knelt beside him where he lay grimacing in pain. He forced Field's head around to look at the marker, then fired at it again. "No," said Field, clearly terrified. "He'll hurt it. Don't." "Tell him to stop," shouted Cracks. "Tell them to put down their weapons and surrender, or I'll have every guard in here shooting the thing." And then, to show he meant business, he fired at the marker a third time. Suddenly, he was overwhelmed with pain, his head feeling as though it were ready to explode. He gasped for breath. People all around him were doing the same. Field screamed and then began to yell for the believers to listen to him, to stop the violence, to put their weapons down. At first, the believers were too distracted by pain, but gradually they gathered themselves and stood as if stunned. Cracks bellowed and raised open his palm to stop his guards from resuming firing. God, his head hurt. "For the good of the marker, we must concede the battle," said Field, wincing from the pain in his leg. "Lay down your weapons, brothers. Do not resist." Cracks was amazed when he found that, to a man, they did. Just more proof, he thought, that religion is a dead end. The next 20 minutes were spent imprisoning the believers and attending to the wounded. There were 4 dead, 2 guards, 2 scientists. He ordered them dragged off to the morgue. Cracks smiled. He hadn't had so much fun since the moon skirmishes. It had been a very satisfying day. If only his head hadn't hurt so much, it would have been downright perfect. Chapter 49. "It started again," said Altman. "The pulse, I'm sure of it." He was clutching his head when he said it, clearly in pain. Ada, too, was rubbing her forehead, although absently, not suffering as much. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," he said. "Then I'll see her again. My mother will come back." Altman turned away, frustrated. They were in the land compound, which had become, as they immediately found out, more like a detainment center than a research facility. Their labs were empty, containing only the most basic equipment. There was only one way out of the center, and that was guarded day and night by a rotation of the 3 men who had originally corralled them from Markov before he had come to the floating compound. All had names that started with T. Terry was thin with glasses, but he carried a large caliber gun. The other 2, Tim and Tom, were brothers, large men who looked enough alike to be twins. On the first day, Altman had tried to go outside and was stopped. "But I just want to," he started to say. "Nobody in and out," said the bespectacled Terry. "That's the rule until the boss says otherwise." When he tried later, with either Tim or Tom on duty, he met a less verbal refusal. He was simply pushed back and then, when he persisted, punched in the stomach. "Go away," Tim or Tom said. There were maybe 20 of them in the compound, including nearly all the scientists from Chicxulub except for Field and, for some reason, Showalter. They tried to continue the research they had been doing in the floating compound, but without the proper equipment, it was impossible. Instead, they compared notes, shared information and research. Like Ada, many of them had become believers. Many of them had been part of Field's flock and looked up to Altman, recognizing him as a reluctant prophet. "The marker has chosen me," a ichthyologist named Agassiz confided in him. "I don't know why, but I know it has to be the case." "Why are you telling me this?" "I know you speak to it," Agassiz said. "Ask it about me." Others were like that as well, approaching him, hoping for a sign or a blessing. At first he tried to tell them that it wasn't possible, that he wasn't a prophet, but it was difficult enough to convince them that he found a few cryptic words or a muttered blessing was quicker. It would get them to leave him alone. Speaking with Agassiz, he realized that it would be a simple matter to manipulate them. He could tell Agassiz that he had a role, and that his role was to obey Altman. There were enough believers that he could use the belief to get them to help him break out, but he hesitated. If they were to try to leave now, they might manage to overpower whichever of the 3 guards was on duty, but probably not for a few more of them were hurt or killed. The last thing he wanted was more deaths on his conscience. Despite the lack of equipment, Scud somehow managed to create a limited set of research equipment, partly by stripping out the wires of the security system, including something that provided a crude measurement of the pulse. He was able to confirm that yes, in fact, the pulse was up and functioning strongly. "I cannot say exactly how strongly," he said. "There is a limitation of the equipment." "Yes," said Altman, "but within that limitation you can confirm that it seems strong." "There is a limitation of the equipment," Scud insisted. But as it turned out, Altman didn't need Scud to tell him. He could tell by the way people around him changed, becoming either withdrawn or violent, and by the fact that he kept turning the corner and running into ghosts. "Help us," they pleaded. "Make us whole." He brooded, wondered what he could do. He had to go public, but how? He couldn't escape. And suddenly, late one night, walking down the hall, he realized that the guard on duty at the front door, Tim or Tom, was talking to himself. He watched him gesture to empty air and then hold out his rifle and let go of it. It clattered to the ground and he just left it there, then went rapidly down the hall, passing Altman without a second glance. Nobody was guarding the door. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his wallet, his holopod, and Ada's hand and immediately rushed to escape. Sure enough, there was still no one there. The key left in a lock. With shaking fingers, he turned it and opened the door. What if it's a trap? He couldn't help but think. Maybe it is a trap, but it might be also my only chance. He crossed the threshold and ran, dragging Ada reluctantly behind him. He was already formulating his next steps. A car or a bus out of town, then a flight back to the North American sector. He'd have to move quickly, but if he did, he might get word out. It was time to go public. Chapter 50. Tim was on duty, standing watch at the outer door when his father appeared. This didn't surprise Tim, apart from the fact that his father had been dead for 20 years and, when alive, he had lived several thousand miles away. "Hello, Tim," he said. He was smoking his pipe and wearing the sweater he had always worn. Well, not always, but a lot. "Dad," he said, "what are you doing here?" "I came to see you." "You don't need to do that, Dad. You didn't need to go to the trouble." "I've been worried about you, Tim," he said. "About you and your brother." "Why, Dad? Tom's okay. I'm doing okay too. We're both working, and we're making good money." "It's not that," said his father, drawing deep on his pipe. "It's just that, well, I don't know how to put this, son, but are you sure that you're ready?" "Ready for what, Dad?" "If you have to ask that, you're not ready, son. And what about your brother?" "I haven't talked to him about it," said Tim. "I'm not even sure what you're talking about." "Things are going to change around here, son," said his father. "Which team will you be on? Will you be on the winning team? Do you have a good hustle?" "I want to be on the winning team, Dad," said Tim eagerly. "I'd like to think I have a good hustle." "Your brother, I think he may have dropped out of the game," said his father. "Are you ready to sub for him?" "Tom," he said, his voice rising. "What happened to Tom?" "I can't rightly say," said his father. "One minute we were talking, and the next moment he wouldn't speak to me. He was listening to the opposing coach at the same time as me. I think he got confused. He was like that when you were kids too. Tom always did tend to misunderstand what I said. You won't do that, will you?" "Where's Tom, Dad? Tell me what happened to Tom." But his father was already gone, vanished into thin air. Or maybe he was still there, but right behind him. Always just behind him, just out of sight. "Dad," he said. "Dad." He paced back and forth anxiously for a moment, but he couldn't stop thinking about Tom. Tom was his older brother, born 9 minutes earlier. He had always looked up to him. They had always looked out for each other. It was almost like they weren't a full person unless the other was there. That together they were 2 people, but one of them, taken separately, wasn't even one. Which was what made guarding the compound door alone so hard sometimes. What was it his dad had said? That Tom had stopped talking. Maybe he was just mad at Dad. Tim didn't understand how you could get mad at Dad. Dad was a great guy, but Tom often had been and sometimes stopped talking to him. Maybe that was part of being an older brother. But maybe it was more than that. Maybe there was something else wrong. He owed it to Tom to check on him. After all, wouldn't Tom have done the same thing for him? And if he didn't do it, then something turned out to be wrong with Tom. How would he ever manage to forgive himself? There was only the problem of the door. He was guarding the door. He needed someone to watch the door while he was gone. Dad, he asked, could you do it? Why, sure, son, said his father. He was just lighting his pipe. What do you want me to do? Take this, said Tim. He gave him the gun. His father couldn't hold on to the gun, dropped it to the floor. That was okay, Tim thought. He could pick it up later after he finished with his pipe. If anyone comes, he said, pump 'em full of lead. His father grinned. Will do, son, he said, and gave Tim a little wave. Yes, sir, he thought Tim, as he headed down the hall in search of Tom. His father was a good egg, that was for certain. He was certainly understanding. Not everybody was lucky enough to have a father like that. He smelled his brother before he saw him, though he didn't know it was his brother at first. All he knew was that he smelled blood, and that it was coming from their room. He went into a crouch and moved in, balanced on the balls of his feet, ready for someone to attack, but the attack never came. His brother was in his bed, turned on his side. Tom, he said to him, Dad said you weren't talking to him. Is anything wrong? Tom didn't say anything. Tom, he said. Not only did he not say anything, but he didn't even move. Tim moved forward and touched his shoulder. He was cold to the touch. Tim suddenly couldn't breathe. Tim pulled him toward him, and he came all at once, and Tim saw his throat cut, that there was a knife in his hand. Chapter 51. Have you seen this? Asked Stevens. Cracks was with him, standing just behind. Seen what? Said Markov. Stevens reached out and opened the vid. It was just broadcast, he said. Still fresh. They stood there together, watching it. It showed Altman before a podium at a press conference. The ticketers on the bottom ran the line. Scientist accuses military of cover-up, and then alien life confirmed? Altman was describing the marker and the expedition. Where is this? Asked Markov. Washington, D.C., he said. How the hell did he get to Washington, D.C.? He turned to Stevens, who in turn looked at Cracks. Cracks suggested, security failure, he said. Not my men, he claimed. Leftovers from Tanner. Every evidence of what we are talking about is the first evidence of alien life, said Altman. But this is not something that the military should be investigating. This is something that should be investigated by scientists from all sectors, a coalition of experts from all over the world. Altman's image disappeared, was replaced by images of the marker itself, taken from within the underwater chamber. How the fuck did he get those? Asked Markov. I don't know, said Cracks. Find out who does. The military wants to cover it up, Altman was claiming. They want to control the investigation so as to use the alien technology to manufacture weapons. We cannot let this happen. There needs to be a public inquiry about the marker's use and its function. Below him, on the ticketer, were the words, Michael Altman, whistleblower or paranoid. Cracks had already started for the door when Markov stopped him. Stevens was speaking to Markov, whispering quietly, both of them just far enough away that Cracks couldn't hear anything. He watched Markov nod, then nod again. Belay that, said Markov to Cracks. You can worry about it when you get back. Find out what hotel Altman is staying in, make sure whatever arrangements you can book us into the neighboring room. Handpick 3 additional men. I went all of us on a plane 15 minutes ago. We need to stamp out this problem right now. Part 6. Hell Unleashed. Chapter 52. It had been a long day. First the press conference, then the other questions, individual interviews. The first one he tried with Ada at his side, but her obsession with the ghost of her mother made her come off as a nut. For the others, he tried to stick to the basics. Yes, there was an alien artifact that they had dubbed the Marker. Yes, it had been found at the heart of the Chicxulub crater under layers of rock, which suggested that it might well be older than human life. No, this was not a hoax. Yes, he was convinced that the military was trying to cover up the existence of the marker. What the rest of the government did or did not know, he couldn't say. He did not bring up the hallucinations. He wanted to avoid the notion that the marker was sentient, and in any case, he wasn't sure the hallucinations really came from the marker. Maybe they were simply triggered by it. He didn't talk about the strange creature on the beach or show them a sign of the tail of the devil, or tell them that the Yucatec Maya believed the devil's tail was deep beneath the waves, just where the marker had been found. Most media outlets, he quickly realized, saw him as an interesting curiosity, an extremist whom they could parade before their viewers and listeners. They were more interested in poking holes in his story. Couldn't the vid be faked? How did they know it was actually the size he said it was? Size should be simulated on a vid, and there was no human figures in the vid to compare it to. Hadn't he gone to Chicxulub to work on a university research grant? And then how was it he had ended up working for the military, living on his alleged floating island? Didn't that sound a little too much like something out of a sci-fi novel? But there were a few people who asked more serious questions, and once he had answered, they looked at him in a different, more thoughtful way. They arrived at the historic Watergate Hotel late, past midnight. There was another round of interviews the next day, requests still coming in over the phone. Also, a meeting with a lawyer about possibly filing an injunction against the government. Public opinion seemed to be building. Maybe it would be enough to apply the right amount of pressure on the places it needed. "It's going to work," Ada said, as he opened the door. "Markov won't be able to keep the marker for himself. Everybody will know about it now. Everyone will have a chance to share its message." Not knowing what to say, he didn't answer. They opened the door, he flipped on the light, and then stopped dead. One of the walls had a large hole in it, plaster scattered all about the floor. Just behind it, sitting in a chair beside the desk, was Markov. "Hello, Altman," he said. Altman started to turn toward the door, but found a gun with a silencer on its end pointed at his eye. Another pointed at Ada's chest. Krax was holding one, a guard he didn't recognize the other. There were two more guards deeper in the room. They came forward now. "I don't need to tell you that they'll shoot your girlfriend first. No screaming," said Krax. "Nothing but polite silence until you are spoken to. You understand?" Altman nodded. "Move into the room," he said. "Get on the bed." They moved in, were pushed onto the bed. Krax stepped back and sat in a chair that he had set up across the threshold of the bathroom, keeping his gun trained at Altman. "I take it you've seen the press conference," said Altman. "Shut up, Altman," said Markov. "Nobody likes a smart-ass." "It's too late, Markov," hissed Ada. "Word is out." Markov ignored her. "Let's have a little talk, Altman," he said. "Talking can't hurt, can it?" Altman didn't say anything. "I don't suppose we could encourage you to drop everything," Markov said. "Hold another press conference. Let them know that you were only joking, that there is no marker, that there is no conspiracy, and you've been a victim of an incredible hoax." "No," said Altman. "If you do," said Markov, "we could come to some sort of arrangement. You'd be allowed to come back to research the marker." When Altman didn't say anything, he added, "with total access." Total access? It was tempting, but no doubt Markov was lying, and in any case, he was far enough along that there was no going back. The marker had to be investigated openly. "He doesn't answer to you," said Ada. "He answers only to the marker." Markov reached out and cuffed her hard. "Shut up," he said. "Don't touch her," said Altman. "That's your answer, Altman?" asked Markov. "I'm sorry," said Altman. "No." "I'm sorry too," said Markov. "That's it then. You're going to have to come with us." "I don't think so," said Altman. "We're not asking you if you want to come or not. We're giving you the choice between coming or dying." "Then kill me," said Altman, without hesitation. Markov looked at him coolly. "Call me superstitious, but I think the marker has something in store for you. I don't want to kill you yet." Markov nodded towards Ada, and Krax's gun slowly swiveled until it was pointed at Ada's head. "But I don't have the same reservations about your girlfriend." Altman looked over at Ada. She didn't look afraid, but it was that very fact that made him afraid. She was eager to die a martyr. "So, the choice is either both go, or with you, or I go. Alone," he said. Markov smiled. "Got it in one," he said. "Krax here has a sedative for both of you." He gestured to the others. "These fine boys will repair the hole we've made, make everything as good as new. As far as anybody knows, you simply got cold feet and disappeared." "You're a real bastard," said Altman. "Takes one to know one," said Markov. "Now be a good boy and take your medicine." Thank you. That was part 10 of Dead Space Martyr. Thank you for listening, and good night.